All right, hello and welcome. We're joined now by Elodie Saint-Anger-Abu. Thanks for being here with us, Elodie. I was really happy when you and Chris want to do this part one, part two around the air period, because it's important and we need somebody to help us think about it, I think, in a really interesting way. I think the two of you tag team in your own very special way is a great way to bring that about. So thanks for being part of the conference this year.
Thanks for having me.
For those that don't know, Elodie is a French Canadian born in the east coast of Quebec and relocated onto the island of Newfoundland, where she has been haunting the meadows since 2006. I want to see that at some point. It seems like there should be a music video that accompanies that. A professional astrologer since 2014, Elodie writes, teaches, and lectures on a variety of astrology-related topics, having a full-time consultation practice, research divination, archaeoastronomy, and study of various healing and magical modalities are her main interests outside of being in nature. See, we need that music video of you in nature in the
I
meadows.
was just gonna say follow my Instagram. It's pretty much just like music video of nature.
Okay, I have a reason to actually pay attention to Instagram. I appreciate it. But I'll pass it over to you and let you take us through what you have today.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Thanks everybody for being here. And thank you, JD, for this fourth year of Astro Magia. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that because it takes a lot of consistency to continue with something like through the years like this. And organizing everybody in time zone and things like that, and giving me a platform, also encouraging us in our work. So I
You're
really
most welcome. You're all welcome.
respect
Thank
that.
you for the appreciation. It means a lot.
Um, for those of you who read my description, Mercury has it that it changed a little, my lecture changed a little bit. Um, and just because for the sake of brevity, I guess we're gonna talk mostly about air period literature today. Uh, because when I set out to prepare this lecture originally, I wanted to just set the tone for the air period, and we'll get into that. And then I wanted to speak on, consciousness and our experience of reality, but I did not have time really to get into that in this presentation. I'm gonna use the we're gonna go through a lot of books. So if you don't like books, tune out now. Because I got about 22 books that were published in the air period. So this lecture is going to be mainly focused on air period literature. Um, but I'm going to use it as a template to make a few commentaries on the moment that we find ourselves in, some ideas I have about what it means to be in the air period. Um, but I'm not gonna draw any conclusion because obviously I haven't lived 200 years of air period myself, so I can't actually make like full statements on that. So it will be observation, and I think just I had set out in 2020 when there was the Saturn Jupiter conjunction in air sign, the first one. I had set out to just compile example of what was being written in previous air period, just to get a vibe. As an astrologer, that's what we do. We just look past cycles, we look for patterns. So I had gone back in time and I started compiling, and it's actually really interesting and compelling. So today that's what I'm gonna do. Now obviously, you know, you might be wondering, what does literature have to do with magic to a certain extent, in this conference? Although, um, the title of the conference is Astral Knowledge, Transmission, Technology, and Text. I'm basically going to do a survey of a lot of texts that have influence or practice as magician astrologers. and thinkers and things like that. So I think, you know, it's indirectly connected to magic in a way that magic is built on all of this previous work. How did I change? Okay, now before I get into what the air period is, the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction cycle, all of this, I'm going to do a little intro on that for those of you who are not aware. I just want to, this is my commentary on the moment as a magical practitioner. And in a sense, you know, when I teach or help people understand what is magic, what is the magically inclined, I like to say that the difference between just a regular person and somebody practicing magic is experience. And this is, I just made up these categories now to kind of explain, but experience, awareness, intention, and coherence. So really the only difference between somebody that doesn't practice magic and somebody that does from a very, very basic standpoint is intention and awareness, literally. Now, the experience part comes into play because I think in order to recognize what you're interacting with, we need a certain amount of experience. Otherwise, you know, anybody, like we can see on TikTok now, you know, anybody can improvise themselves like witches and sorcerers and all of that. But if you don't have the experience to actually recognize what you're interacting with, it's obviously lacking substance a little bit. So I put experience there, awareness of what you're interacting with. What's your intention? That's going to depend on you personally as a practitioner. So intention is loose in a sense. And then coherence. And coherence is going to come back again, and Chris is going to talk about this too. So this talk on the air period is in 2 sections, like JD said. Chris is going to be talking in a couple of hours on the air period too, and we have a lot of overlapping ideas about the moment and about the need for coherence. So you're going to hear me talk about that over and over again. So for those of you who are not astrologers directly, and I just, you know, and those of you who know, bear with me for a second. I like to lay the ground very simply, you know. I just want to speak on the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction, which delineates the air period that I'm talking about. So it's obviously in astrology, we have all sorts of ways of measuring periods, eras, cycles. There's a lot of sub-cycles, things like that. What I'm focusing on today is the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction in air sign. And astrologers for a very long time have followed Saturn-Jupiter's conjunction to delineate really important cultural shifts. The reason is that they happen in a beautiful geometry over a period of time in the same elemental sign. So for a period of approximately 200 years, these conjunctions will happen in air signs, and then water, fire, and earth. And it always starts with the cardinal signs, and then it continues. So yeah, it's a good marker often for really important cultural change that's been used for a very long time. So I really like this little quote from the Chaldean oracle: "In the whole world shines the triad over which the monad rules. This order is the beginning of all section, for the mind of the Father said that all things be cut into 3." So again, just talking about the air triplicity. So for those of you who are not familiar, in 2020, we had the first conjunction in an air sign, which signals the 200-year air period we've just begun. Although there was one in 1980, they're like approximated. But so what does it mean to have entered an air period? Obviously, a lot of astrologers speculates. But we can look at the qualities of air, and qualities of the air signs have a lot to do with mobility. And we're gonna see when I look at this is what I've just noticed. I was like, when I started preparing the lecture, I was like, I'm not gonna draw any conclusion on this. I'm just gonna observe. I'm not gonna make statements because it's very easy as an astrologer to have confirmation bias. And I don't have time to look at water period literature, fire period literature, earth period literature. So, what tells me that what I come up with didn't happen during fire and water and earth period too. So, but as I started compiling all of this literature, I started realizing there is themes during the air periods that have to do with mobility, borders, kind of changing, a lot of interconnection between culture, a lot of migration. And if we pay attention to what's happening right now with the internet, but also with the world and air travel and things like that, that is happening. Obviously, we don't have the 200-year perspective to see the chunk of how much that's changing, but I think everybody is feeling that things are moving very fast, changing really rapidly. Information circulates really rapidly, which is all very typical of air period. So I just wrote a few qualities here. All the air signs are masculine, diurnal, which daytime, versatile, dynamic, mobile, scattering, restless, unstable, communicative, and extroverted. And if we think again about the moment we find ourselves in and the way we are like accessing information and the amount of information there is, we can really see this air quality that is present right now in the world. So lightness, capacity to penetrate, which is kind of like water also, but in a different way, because it has more to do with sound and smells. And so sound waves, speech, music, communication, again, utterance, all transported through air. And so when we start thinking about air period and how things could manifest or how we want to notice what is happening in the world, we can think of these qualities. And which brings me to the beginning of this presentation. So obviously, I cannot cover all of the air period. I put them here for you, but I decided to focus on 2 air period of the current era, which is 3rd, 4th century current era, and then 13th, 14th century of the current era. We're going to look at literature from that period just to see important work. And obviously we know that history is written by the privileged or the people who win. So we always have to keep that in mind too, that obviously I'm just using the information that's available. But there was, prior to that, prior to current era, we have these air period also, which would be quite fascinating to explore. But yeah, I just didn't have time. So starting with the 3rd, 4th, 5th century air period literature, I have this is from Mystic Medusa website. She has and I put the link here for people who want to see all of the periods. She has them all laid out with color coding, and it's very nice to just reference. You can see water and fire and all of the other period. And so we can see that they tend to overlap with each other. Saturn and Jupiter will form a conjunction in Earth sign here and there, and then officially the air period begins. But I just kind of lump it out together between 332 and 551 for the sake of this presentation. So some notable events just culturally, and this is like really quick, obviously, but some notable event. And I just want to say that before I forget to, when, for those of you who are aware of the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction and were aware of it around 2020 when it was happening, there was a lot of really dire predictions being made. And I think one of the reasons for that is because the sack of Rome, the collapse of the Western Empire happened during an air period. And so people were like, oh, the air period, like it's the end, it's the end of the Western world, you know, and that along with like the Pluto return of the US and things like that, I've seen a lot of astrologer indulging in that kind of dire prediction. And I think, sure, there is legitimacy to that, but I think it's beyond that. Once you take a step back and you look at what was happening in other culture during that period, you realize that that's a part. Yes, empire falls, borders open. There's a big cultural exchange that happens, a lot of intermingling of culture, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. I guess that's what I want to say, just from a more objective perspective. For example, in India, um, at that time, the air period of this time was is considered the golden age and classical period of India. Like the zero was invented or surfaced in text, and so and pre-Islamic poetry blossom and grew to prominence and things like that. But we still see these themes of migration and political instability that we can probably expect also to see in this current air period. Um, but again, I just want to reinstate that I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. And I think like when we see astrologer make prediction of like the air period being like troublesome and things like that, I think they're looking at the collapse of the Western and Roman Empire and judging on that. But you know, again, who writes history? And from like from the Germanic perspective, like, and even the Italian perspective that writes history in the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, it's not, they don't tend to view it as a catastrophic event as much, you know. Um, so yeah, migration period, also known as the barbarian invasion from a more like European perspective. Again, air and mobility. The Germanic and Slavic tribes were settled agriculturalists who were probably drawn into the politics of the empire already falling apart. So some people say that like the Slavic and Germanic people like contributed to the fall of Rome, but it's also theorized that it was probably already falling, you know. Um it's yeah, so let me see here. Okay, before I get into the books, I wanted just to make a little commentary on first illuminated manuscripts. I promised myself I was going to stick to just literature today and not art. It was really, really hard because there's also a lot of beautiful art. But the trend of illuminated manuscript seem to have began during the air period of late antiquity. And this is an example here. Although it looks like it was drawn like yesterday, I was looking and I was like, I had to double check my sources because I was like, is this real? Is this fake? It really looks like somebody might have drawn it like yesterday. Um, so illuminated manuscript, they came much later, but we start to see example of that during the air period in the 5th century. And this is an example of the earliest surviving illuminated manuscripts, small numbers from antiquity dated from 400, 500. Now, the Confession of Augustine of Hippo were written during the air period, around 397, and it's one of the most widely read religious work with like a unique autobiography in the Western world. And it offers a keen insight into Augustine's life and a sharp understanding of the human heart. So this is one of the like famous book from this era period. One of the themes, the restless heart. Augustine has discovered the majesty and mystery of God as the condition for interpreting human restlessness, which I thought was interesting. The mystery of God, which is kind of I mean, it's esoteric. It's just a little bit more like Christian, but God is fully hidden while at the same time fully present. And that idea to me is interesting. I mean, outside of the Christian perspective. He was really influenced by Neoplatonic ideas, tangible forms, all of these things. So that's one of the book from the air period. The other one being The City of God, really influenceable text from that period also. Which is like a book on Christian philosophy, and it was in response to allegation that Christianity brought about the decline of Rome, basically. Um, Augustine sought to demonstrate that the events of 410, the sack of Rome and the fall of Rome, were but a glimpse of all history. It was him who popularized the linear versus cyclical view of history. Now, was it him? I mean, it's him that's recognized for that, but I thought it was an interesting detail. He popularized the linear versus cyclical view of history. Um, that's, as an astrologer, I find that fascinating because I always perceive time more as cyclical than linear. So it's interesting that this is kind of a timeline where, oh, okay, we start to view history as linear. I'm going to continue moving because there's a lot of books. This is when I found this. I'm sure some of you are already familiar with this. I was not. I was familiar with the 7 liberal arts, but this book I was not. So, on the marriage of philology and Mercury, and I even had to look the word up, philology, because I didn't know, which is the love of words. And this book is basically thought to be where the 7 liberal arts were introduced as a concept. And this book was used extensively to teach through all medieval Europe for a really long period of time. So it was written between 400 and 420. And it presents the learned tradition on the arts of the word, grammar, rhetoric, dialectic, numbers, geometry, arithmetic, astronomy, and music. And basically, it's all allegorical. So the 7 tracks are delivered by beautiful virgin, the disciplines embodied, basically. And I watched a lecture. I found a lecture actually online by a professor of music and a specialist of jazz that was like reading excerpt of this book. And also this podcast, I'm putting it here for those of you who is interested in knowing more about this book. The Secret of Western Esotericism podcast has an episode on this book, and the this is the professor Jay Bergman has a presentation on the musical aspect from this book, and it's really interesting. There's like the whole Greek conception and the music of the sphere and all of that is contained within this book. So and it's it's interesting to think that this was used like just to teach in like basically because there's a lot of you know things that we use in astrology and magic that parallels in that text. I'm just gonna backtrack for a second. So the writer, I just want to speak on the writer a little bit. He was born in North Africa. He was Latin or wrote in Latin, and he's known for having taken the knowledge of ancient Greek music theory in his treatment of music, basically in the book, and then arithmetic and astronomy and things like that. This book and the Marcianus can be understood in terms of the reputation of his book, which was read, thought, and commented upon throughout the early Middle Age and really shaped European education during the early medieval period. So also, this is a theme that I'm seeing a lot recurring, just looking at air period literature, a lot of compilation of previous authors. So this is actually a compilation of previous work, previous authors. And so we see sort of like ideas recycle and synthesize and like compendium, basically. Another book here, Consolation of Philosophy by Boethius. That was written in 523. Again, we're just in the middle of the air period. I just want to like backtrack if I can. Whoops, how do I do this? Just to go back to the air period, like let's look here. 332, 392, you know, so by the time we arrived we're basically, Boethius was like late air period at this point. And I was looking for a quote and I found this quote and I was like, I read this somewhere. Who would give a lot to lovers? Love is unto itself a higher law. And you know, it's very similar to what Aleister Crowley said like way later. But basically I was like, did he like get that from Consolation? And I researched to see if Crowley got Love is the Law uh, from Consolation and Boethius, but no, it's like given to him or it's attributed to Crowley. So Boethius was like a polymath, historian, philosopher of early Middle Age. Like all the people who wrote at that point, they were um, he translated Greek classic into Latin, and he sought to reconcile the teaching of Plato and Aristotle with Christian theology, basically. He sought to translate the entirety of the Greek classic to Western scholars, basically, published numerous transcription, commentaries, although a lot of unfinished stuff. The Consolation was composed in the 5th century under imminent threat of execution while he was in prison. And Bertrand Russell, one of the most eminent atheists of the 20th century, concedes that Boethius would have been remarkable in any age, but in the age in which he lived is utterly amazing in terms of just philosophy and the breadth of like the synthesis of ideas. And again, we see this sort of synthesis, consolidation, which seems to happen during the air period. But again, I'm just suggesting that because I haven't looked at water period, fire period, earth period in detail. The philosophical scope of Consolation, quite apart from its literary merit, is simply staggering. It raises question about the moral order of the cosmos, the ultimate purpose and meaning of human existence, freedom of the will, mystery and nature of evil, the relationship between chance, providence, and human affairs. And I think it's him too that spoke extensively on the Wheel of Fortune at that time. Moving on. This I really thought was one of the most representative sort of vibes that have to do with the air period. This is The Literary Mind and the Carving of Dragons by, I cannot pronounce properly, Liu Zi. He was a Chinese literary critic and a Buddhist monk. And this classical text explored the intricacies of literary creation, employing the metaphor of carving dragons to elucidate the craft of writing. He delves into the artistry of language, dissecting the nuance of expression and the profound connection between the written word and the human psyche. The Literary Mind and Carving of Dragons give a comprehensive treatment of literary theories and critical opinions from the earliest period to his own time. So basically, again, we're talking about a compendium. He looks at all the previous literature trends and really tries to synthesize and get at the roots of what is hidden behind the words, basically. So comprehensive learning and broad experience are the only foods that will nourish writing afflicted with poverty of substance. Whoops. This is a quote that I really like. So, comprehensive learning and broad experience are the only foods that will nourish writing afflicted with poverty of substance, and coherence and unity are the only medicine which will cure confusion. To be coherent and unified, as well as comprehensive, is also one way to reduce mental effort. And to me, this is it's a good commentary on what air does. And we can see right now, like I'm just gonna do a little sidestep. We can see right now that we have access to so much information, and it is to a certain extent very incoherent because it's there's so much, and I think, I'm speculating, but this commentary to me is very apropos on air period. There's a need to simplify instead of adding more, to a certain extent. Um, there was another little quote that I really like. Yeah, this was about just literary work never really being completed once and for all. The value is ever enhanced by the reinterpretation across the ages. So a literary work loses much of its richness if it's not appreciated. Again, this idea of like retaking ideas and reworking them through time. I really like that. So, little break for a second. This just again, why is coherence during the air period so important? Because the information tend to move around way more rapidly. Um, there's democratization of knowledge. Often we see, and this is just like looking at the first air period of this century here. We haven't even looked at the other ones. And paradoxically, there's like this need to sort through and synthesize what we're seeing because there's so much. And I can think of just myself, as an astrologer and what's happening in terms of like academia versus just like using books and other people and lecture and YouTube to literally have a career, which is totally fine. But like if you look maybe 200 years from now, we'll see this period as like really breaking down and reorganizing information in different ways. We're so used in our mindset, like our grandfather, like go to university, get a job, it's legitimate. But now it doesn't really mean the same thing that it used to. Um, and it's a good thing and it's a bad thing because anybody can improvise themselves anything, which is good and bad. So it's just a little commentary on the need to sort through and synthesize what it is that we're absorbing. And I guess that was the part also of the lecture and presentation, my commentary on the air period. I wanted to I wanted to bring back like our awareness to what is it that we're paying attention to? What is it that we're taking in? Is it relevant? Do we indulge in way too much like information? Why are people so anxious? Uh, there's like this term that was coined in like 2007, like brain rot. And it's funny because when you think about the air period, you would think that like people would get more intelligent, and we are to a certain extent, but we're also paradoxically witnessing like TikTok brains. People don't have memory for anything. They can't focus on one thing. Like probably most of you are scrolling right now looking at like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter in loop while like listening to me maybe a little bit. And it's totally fine. I do it too, and I mean, but it's like we're interested in anything and everything at the same time. But it has a detrimental impact on cognitive function and including memory and ability to concentrate. So it's just little side note. And I don't know what the people in previous air period felt like, it was different, obviously, but you can see in this time that, like, these are some of the things that we're facing. Um, More information that is not useful equals generally more anxiety, and most importantly, it becomes very difficult to know what is true and what is real, because who knows? You know, it's like I see so many things, like I'm online, I'm like, is this real? Like even the Roman illuminated manuscript, like I had to double check my sources like 3 times. I was like, is that AI generated? Is this real? Um, so that was just a little interlude. Um, a few more books from this period. This is a very important work. For those of you who know Vedic astrology, you will know this book for sure. The Pancha Siddhantika by Barahamihira. Excuse me. He was a 6th century astrologer, astronomer, polymath, and all of the all of the things. And he basically compiled all of the schools of astrology from that period. All Pancha means 5. Yes, Pancha means 5. And Siddhantika means principle or treatise. So the 5 treaties. And so he looked at all of the traditions that were going on, and he basically synthesized them all. One of them, interesting, the Romaka Siddhanta, which is the treatise on of Romans, is the only, and I might not be right here, but this is what I've come across and read, the only Vedic work treating of astrology that is in tropical system. Um, so he was born in during the Gupta period. So if you remember at the beginning, I showed there was a classical golden age taking place in India during this era period. So he was born at that time, and he was a very eminent astronomer, mathematician, and basically summarized the content of the 5 treatises, 5 school of astronomy prevalent in India, compendium of Greek, Egyptian, Roman, Indian astronomy. And notable mathematical concept within this book, the Pancha Siddhantika, includes the use of the decimal notation, which was not seen yet, not in writing anyway, and also arithmetic addition, subtraction operations involving the 0, which is, if you research the beginning of 0, this is here. And it's in relation to astrology and astronomy, so, you know. He studied Greek and praised the Greeks, the Yavanas, in his writing for being highly schooled in the science while being impure in terms of the religious orders. Some academics believe that he's a strong candidate for understanding and popularizing the zodiac signs, astrological calculation, and auspicious ritual predictions. Later, Al-Biruni, 11th century astrologer, traveled to India and to specifically study astrology, and he mentions in his writing, Al-Biruni mentioned in his writing, Bahamihira. So I think there's some of these books that are like they're available online PDF, and I started like diving into that, but I don't have like 5 lifetimes, unfortunately, to read them. But really fascinating, particularly to me, the Roma Siddhanta. Whoops. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, the treatise of Romans. That I would really like to read that. It's really debated also if India learned astrology from the Greek, or if the Greek learned learn astrology from India. And I was talking to Chris earlier about this because it's a very controversial topic amongst academics. And it's probably both, because you think of just the way people were moving around. But people are very, like, people really want Indian astrology to have emerged there just as much as like Greek and Mesopotamian astrology to have emerged there, but you can see like cross-cultural in both sides, and I think that's just the reality of it. It didn't emerge in this, they traded ideas. This is my personal opinion of that. Lastly, for this era period, the 5th century, pre-Islamic poetry, which is a really significant, beautiful period, which was mostly oral tradition, but we start to see writing during the 5th century. And so this period is kind of called like, yeah, the birth of Arabic poetry, basically, this era period. So historians had long believed that the Bedouin nomads who lived in the area composed exquisite poetry to record the feats of their tribes, but had no system for writing it down. But in recent years, people have made profound advances in explaining how ancient speakers of early Arabic used the letters of other alphabets to transcribe their speech. And these alphabets include Greek, Aramaic, and also Safaitic. So the oral Bedouin tradition endured and continues to this day in vibrant written form, but a contrastic, identifiable written strain of pre-Islamic poetry blossomed and grew to prominence in the 5th and 6th century, featuring its own set of poetic tropes and carried on by the so-called Jahili, agnostic or ignorant poets. And this is just a little image of some example of that when we start to see like the oral tradition being written down. And this is again a whole fascinating realm that we don't have time to get into today. So, how much time do I have left? Okay, how we doing?
Yeah, we're doing well. You start about halfway.
Okay, so the jumping into the next era period from the 5th century, which is the 13th century. Some really interesting things happening here. And we can see that there's some water period that begins midway through this. And when I say water period, it just means Saturn and Jupiter conjoined in a water sign at some point during this era period. This is what we see here. So what was happening at this point? Mongol Empire founded by Genghis Khan, the decline of the Islamic Golden Age because the Mongolians went and sacked Baghdad. So we see again the same sort of like back and forth between borders and cultures, less stability, but a lot of more exchange. Marco Polo explored Asia, First War of Scottish Independence, paper arrives in Europe, the Great Famine, the Black Death, no big deal. Black Death is definitely my favorite, and I'm gonna make a little commentary on that. I know it's not a book, but my morbid fascination. So the reason I wanted to just make a little commentary on the Black Death is because astrologers, astronomer of the period, basically were commenting on the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction in air sign having been the cause of the Black Death at that period. And I found some really good excerpt. This is a quote from a French astrologer translated. I did not find the original text, but it's on the judgment of the sun at the feast of Saturn, and it was written, around that time, air period. And when all the gods had come to this feast and Jupiter had entered the house of Saturn, a great dispute arose between Saturn and Jupiter over the human race. And in this way, I describe the hostility and contradiction of these two planets, both in complexion and in effect. For Saturn is excessively cold and dry, and as a result, is a corrupter of human life. Jupiter is moderately warm and moist, and therefore can be said to be a friend of the human condition. So obviously, you know, astrologers for way longer than this were commenting on the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction. Mohammed is said to be born under a Saturn-Jupiter conjunction in Scorpio in a water sign. But anyways, the reason I wanted to talk about the plague is just because astrologers were commenting on the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction, but also it's the most fatal pandemic to occur in Europe during that time and wiped out 50% of the population. So it kind of sets the tone for the vibe there a little bit. And I think maybe that's why there was so many monks hiding. I don't know. I was like, yeah, I would have been a monk back then. You know, it's kind of safe, feels safer than to be on the streets, like catching plague. So there's also a really cool phrase. Again, I didn't find too much information, but by Simon de Couvin. He was a Belgian astronomer. And he said basically, oh, I can't find my notes now. Sorry, yeah, I'm not finding my notes on this now, but anyways, Black Death, Saturn, Jupiter. Also, I just wanted to say, I think that's another reason, like these kind of text, I think it's another reason people in 2020, astrologers were like, ooh, like conjunction and air sign, like we're having a pandemic, there's lockdown, look what happened in Europe and during the last air period, like everybody died. So I think it contributed to like the fear mongering. And yeah, I just wanted to comment on that. As a side note too, danse macabre in French is like a whole style of art, like and that emerged from the plague, basically, where you start seeing people dancing with skeletons, and that's becomes like a whole thing all through the Renaissance. Basically, the term in French is danse macabre, but it's like a whole style that emerged from basically plague era. And this to a tomb from 1394 air period. I have some ideas about like Aquarius, and we've talked about this, me and Chris, in previous Astro Magia presentation. Like I think it was the second one, maybe second year we did, but we discovered like a lot of links to entombment and tomb and the cult of the tomb in that part of a part of Aquarius in our lunar mansion research. So anyways, just interesting side note. That's the quote I was looking for. So yeah, did I read this already? I think I did. The conjunction Saturn and Jupiter signifies great general events. I didn't. Yeah, this is another commentary on the moment, the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction from another astrologer. He was a Jewish astrologer.
I don't think so.
Basically, when it takes place in a fixed sign, the impact will last for many days. In this case, for the conjunction to take place on the 28th of March. And I think there was an eclipse really close to that, so astrologers were really amping it up, and it created like a lot of fears, but a lot of justification for the plague too. Returning to the illuminated manuscript, because we see that there's beginning of illuminated manuscript themes in the 5th century, then there's nothing, 5th century air period, then there's nothing, and then, oh, they start to emerge again for the first time during the 2nd air period of our era. So interesting observation, just seemed to be a thing that emerges during the air periods. So we start to see, the revitalization of illuminated manuscript. Many of the early designs were introduced to European craftsmen by their counterparts in the Middle East through trade in the Iberian Peninsula. This influence can be clearly seen through the appearance of Islamic patterns in European manuscripts dating from the Middle Age. Paper, a big deal. This contributes to literature. I found this just on a website here, but it was pretty legit timeline. And if you look, paper making introduced to Morocco, and then introduced to Spain, to Italy, to England, and then to France, Germany, and then all the way to Gutenberg, who invented the printing press. Look at this timeline. We have 1100 to 1450. What is this timeline? Air period. So we see the introduction of of paper. And again, like, you know, these dates are approximative because even the conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter, there's the mean one, and so they're not exact dates for the people of you who are very particular about that, but approximations. But still very interesting to see how paper makes its way into Europe and all the way to the printing press during that air period chunk. First printed book, 1377. It's called the Jikji, and it's an abbreviation title for a Korean Buddhist document whose title can be translated to anthology. Again, another thematic of air time, anthology, compendium, synthesis. So it was printed in 1377. It's the world's oldest extant book printed with movable metal that we know of. UNESCO confirmed Jigchi as the world's oldest metalloid type and was published in 1377, 78 years prior to Gutenberg's acclaimed 42-line Bible. So, and I really like this. See the minds of others through meditation to learn the Buddha's mind. I was going to talk about remote viewing. Those of you who came here to hear me talk about remote viewing will have to reschedule, but I really like this quote. Conference of Bird, very famous poem from this air period. It was written in 1177, and the air period technically starts 10 years later. To me, I was like, yeah, that's kind of like 10 years ago, because 10 years ago, the air period started in 2020. So, you know, it's like the verge between like the Earth and air period. And Conference of Bird is like, it's a very famous poem. And it exerted a really big influence on Islamic mysticism. So if you have a chance to go into it a little bit, it's very interesting. The poem describes the Sufi path towards enlightenment through an allegory, the search launched by birds towards the end of the world in order to find the king, the travel led by a hopo to find Simorg, king of the birds. The parable in this book trigger memories deep within us all. The stories inhabit imagination, and slowly over time, the wisdom trickles down into the heart. Yeah, I'm gonna stop there because I still have a few books I want to show, but really nice book. And then from there we see Rumi, and this is again a poet from the air period. Very important influence, mystic, Sufi mystic from present-day Afghanistan. His work was mostly written in Persian, but occasionally he also used Turkish, Arabic, and Greek. And actually, it's interesting, when I was looking up, it was still known to Arabs, Persian, and Turks. So where he came from, the area was still an area called Rum, R-U-M. So as such, there are a number of historical people born in association with Anatolia, because he has a link to Anatolia, known as Rumi. So the R-U-M is actually kind of like a link to Roman. in which context Roman refers to subjects of Byzantine Empire or simply to people living in or things associated with Anatolia. I just thought that was an interesting side note. I'm gonna keep going because I can see time. How much time do I have left?
You have a little over 30 minutes.
Oh, great. I thought I had 4 minutes left.
You have 4 minutes left.
Do I?
No, you have a little over 30 minutes. Sorry.
Yeah, so Rumi, obviously everybody knows Rumi, so I'm just gonna keep going. Le Grand Albert, this is relevant for a lot of people here, I'm sure, and some of you may have used Le Grand Albert, 1245, the Book of Secrets. Albertus Magnus, also known as Saint Albert the Great, was a German Dominican friar, philosopher, scientist, bishop, sorcerer, and considered one of the greatest medieval philosophers and thinkers. So again, his writing is a compendium of previous work of astronomy, astrology, mineralogy, alchemy, zoology, physiology, justice, law, friendship, love. On the surface, but it's also considered a grimoire. And the book contained instruction on how to summon spirits, demons, other supernatural beings, as well as spells and incantation for various purposes, such as healing, protection, love, recommended herbal remedies, potion, common ailment, all of this stuff. I'm sure a lot of people here know about this book. If you don't, look it up. It's an interesting rabbit hole. He wrote also Speculum Astronomy, the Mirror of Astronomy, to defend astrology as a Christian form of knowledge. And this to me, again, is very interesting because we see how things are mutating. We have like the fall of Rome, Christianity, like, is there astrology? Is it religion? And this is a good example because he was basically it was like a whole compendium and synthesis again of encyclopedic knowledge. But Albert wrote the Speculum in response to the debate concerning medieval astrology. And it came to head with the condemnations in 1277 at the University of Paris with a certain Bishop Tempier. And this bishop had proposed 219 propositions that were forbidden to believe in or even discuss. And this bishop and his allies were concerned that much of Aristotelian knowledge being integrated into European university represented a challenge to Christianity. And basically, this book, Mirror of Astronomy, became central to the debate about astrology in medieval Renaissance and early modern period. And it put astrology on a really exalted plane in connection with the world of the divine and the material world. And Albertus, who wrote it, goes as far to find certain types of astrological talisman to be theologically acceptable so long as no invocation to spirits or inexplicable sigils or signs are used. And when I was researching this, I came across Christopher Warnock website, and he did extensive writing on Albertus Magnus. So if you guys are curious, you want more information, Christopher Warnock has a lot of article on it. Thomas Aquinas, again, we're like in the same, I think they might have known each other because I came across something from Saint Albert. It was like a commentary on Aquinas. Basically, I think Thomas Aquinas was also for astrology, but not as much. And pretty much everybody knows Thomas Aquinas. He did a summary of theology. Again, we see a compendium idea of previous work. There's extensive commentary on astrology in this work, and it's easy to find. He states very clearly that the stars can influence our temperaments and make us predisposed to certain patterns of behavior, but he is firm in his assertion that the heavenly bodies cannot cause us to do or not do something, as they cannot control our fate. So that was his take on it. And obviously, like, his work is extensive and there's a lot to it. I just wanted to like pull out the little commentary on astrology. Another important work from this era period, the Divine Comedy, which is like a narrative poem written by Italian philosopher and theologist Dante, and it's about the soul's journey towards God. But it's also a lot of information on the science of his day. In the Purgatory, for example, it's repetitively referred to as, there's the implication of the spherical Earth that is repetitively spoke about in the Purgatory. And then we can even see, like, this is just a little quote, but like, whoops. This is just a little quote, but it's very astrological. He basically says, at sunset in the Purgatory, it is midnight in Spain, and it's dawn in Jerusalem and noon on the river Ganges, basically. And I'm not going to go extensively into Dante because that's really accessible work, and it's very broad. So if people want to look, but interesting, again, interesting and very famous work that came out through this period. I wanted to add this because it was really fascinating to me. This is the Codex Gigas, and it's according to the legend, the codex was created by Herman the Recluse in Bohemia, which is now part of Western Czechia, sometimes between 1204 and 1230. And you see that I put this picture because, like, I was like, whoa, it's so big. It's the largest extant medieval illuminated manuscript in the world. It is a Romanesque Latin Bible. Very large illuminated Bibles were typical of monastic book production, but even among these, the page size of this codex is exceptional. The manuscript is also known as the Devil's Bible due to its highly unusual full-page portrait of Satan. And the legend surrounding the book's creation, which is basically Herman the Recluse would have made a deal with the devil. He broke his monastic vows and was sentenced to be walled up alive. And to escape death, he promised to create in one night a book to glorify the monastery forever, including all human knowledge. Near midnight, he became so desperate that he prayed to Lucifer to help him finish the book in exchange for his soul. The devil completed the manuscript, and the monk added the devil's picture as a tribute. So the rest of the book is, there's no images or anything like that, and it's just mostly a Bible, but there's 3 spells and 2 magic formulas. Perhaps they were placed there to counterbalance the devil. The purpose of the spell is to cure sudden disease and feverish state, while the formulas describe how to capture thieves using various rituals. So just another interesting book from that period. This is other pages from that manuscript. I put this here, Roman de la Rose, although it's kind of controversial. It's a very famous French book. I say controversial just because it's kind of like, it's been said to be like misogyn, like sexist, basically, which is typical for French people, like from France. And just joking. But I put it there because it's a very famous text, especially if you're French speaking. Everybody knows Roman de la Rose. It's like courtly love, and it's an account of a prophetic dream that came to its narrator. But basically, it's a lot of like sensual language and sexual encounters, and possibly the most read book in Europe in the 14th, 15th century, according to some, probably because it talks about sex. I wanted to add it here just as a side note. Canterbury Tales, also from the Air period, a collection of 24 stories that runs over 17,000 lines, written in Middle English between 1387 and 1400. And the storytelling, so for those of you who don't know, I didn't know the Canterbury Tales because I'm not Anglophone, but supposedly it's very popular. And it's basically tales presented as part of a storytelling contest by a group of pilgrims as they travel together from London to Canterbury to visit the shrine of St. Thomas Becket. The prize for this contest is a free meal at the Tabard Inn. But so supposedly it's a great resource for learning about Middle English. It paved the way for later writers like Shakespeare, and it provides a lot of insight into life in medieval England. And again, I found this quote from it: "Who shall give a lover any law? Love is a greater law by my troth than any law written by mortal men." So again, we see this, like, there's Boethius and consolation, and then it's in the Canterbury Tales again. Just put it there. Interesting. Travels of Marco Polo, very famous, like, summary of travel. Obviously everybody knows, I think. So he was a Venetian Italian explorer, and basically it's believed that the Book of Marvels, or his travel, was a collaboration between him and a professional writer, Rustichello of Pisa. It is believed that Polo related his memoirs orally to Rustichello while both were prisoners in the Geneva Republic. And I thought this was kind of air period also, just like mobility, moving around, learning about other cultures, and like this kind of merging of cultures and language and things like that. And the red line here is what he covered. Is it the red? Yes. And then I was like, who's the green light here that went all around? And it's Ibn Battuta. And so I looked that up, and we have the Middle Eastern Arabic equivalent, which I had never heard of, but supposedly is very famous also, in a sort of retelling of his travels. And you can see he went all the way in North Africa, everywhere here. That's the green line for him. It was also written during the Air period, 1354. And he was a Maghrebi traveler, explorer, and scholar. And over a period of 30 years, from 1325 to 1354, he visited most of North Africa, Middle East, East Africa, Central Asia, Southeast Asia, China, Iberian Peninsula, West Africa. And near the end of his life, he dictated an account of his journey titled "A Gift to Those Who Contemplate the Wonders of Cities and the Marvels of Travelings." But it is commonly known as the Rila. And I'm actually gonna look it up more attentively, because it's a good insight into the world at this time and also how things circulated. And then we have the Icelandic saga. So we have three different important tales of travels that explains the world at that time and also the meaning of other culture. And the Icelandic saga comprise of saga of Eric the Red and the saga of the Greenlanders, and it's basically their discovery of North America, Vinland, maybe that's Newfoundland where I am. And so those that was written also during the Air period, so 1265. And lastly, the Red Book of Hergest. I can't even pronounce that because I don't know anything about Welsh. I don't know if there's a Welsh in the room, but um like the Mabinogion. So basically, this is a compendium of oral stories, and for the first time compiled into writing. And it's thought to be pre-Christian and Celtic mythology, basically. And it's the first written compendium of it, basically. But it's supposedly stories based on thousands of, like 1,000 year earlier than this. Um, just like the Icelandic saga, same thing. It's like events that happen in the 10th century, and then it gets compiled. It's oral tradition, and it gets compiled and written down. Same thing for this. I'm losing my voice. Other important books and book trends from that period: Book of Hours. I just wanted to add it because I really love Book of Hours as an astrologer. There's a lot of stuff in there. Obviously, it's from like a Christian prayer books, but within the Book of Hours, we see a lot of timing protocols that came from the Jews. And later on, it becomes the almanacs that we know, and the timing of when to plant things and all of these things. And so we start to see books of hours during that air period. And that is the tour of the air period literature. And I guess I'm just going to do a little commentary again on the moment, even if I did. And this is just really about right now. This is just what I observe, and what I observe as an astrologer. And I consult with people a lot and things like that. And Jupiter in Gemini is an air sign. Pluto will be in Aquarius. And there's a lot of talking, but no one is really paying attention. I think because everybody's so saturated with just too much information, and it goes again to what I was saying, and Chris is going to extend on that in his presentation, but just the need for coherence, for finding coherence, for finding what is meaningful versus a lot of just like fluff. And that's it. That's my presentation.
Thank you so much, Elodie.
My
Let's see
pleasure.
if anybody has any questions they want to ask. Please pop it into the chat.
I saw that the chat was like going, but I
It
couldn't.
was mainly jokes and
Okay.
just sticking along with what you were, we were sticking to the points that you were making, but occasionally some very good jokes,
I'm
which is
glad I
always
missed
lovely.
it.
Oh, well, it'll be in the recording that I send you, so you can download it if you're really that keen on it. But it was lovely, always some lovely chat there.
Yeah,
Yeah, go
Peter
ahead.
Hable. Oh, I was just gonna say, Peter
Yeah,
says
there was
that.
a comment at the, go ahead. Mhm.
Well, I was just talking before I got on this conference. I was talking with Chris about this quote, and he said the same thing, probably Rabelais, because that's where he remembered it from. But I see it popping in like Boethius, which is way before, and then the Canterbury Tales too. So it's intriguing.
Totally. Yeah, I one of the things I was going to bring up that was a difference between those two periods, and I might be wrong around this. The second one seemed heavier. I don't know if that's true. I don't know. Do you think that's relevant? Like the first one,
Well, it's because we have more textual evidence of
I mean,
text.
heavier as in like, yeah, it seemed, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about it. Yeah, the Roman Empire falls, right?
The
But
Roman Empire falls, exactly. And it's just because I spend more time talking about the plague because I wanted to, because I find it
sure,
like really
totally,
interesting. But
totally,
I was like the Saccharum, I'm fed up hearing about it.
totally. But
But
I do think one of the differences though that was important potentially, and I might be wrong, is like what when they finally move into the air period out of the transition, what sign is it that it starts in, and I think the first one that you were talking about, I think when it finally transitions, it's Libra that it goes into first and then
It
initiates.
always starts with cardinal. Saturn,
Okay, does
Jupiter
it?
eras always start in the cardinal. It's always initiated by the cardinal signs.
But didn't this one really start like we officially move into it with Aquarius, correct?
Well, yeah, because we have this small chunk. We had the Saturn Jupiter conjunction in Libra in the 80s, and then it started with
Yeah.
Aquarius, but it got initiated. The thematics, if you look, imagine you're like a historian, like 500 years from now, you're gonna lump
Yes.
in 1980 with 2020,
Okay,
most
yeah.
likely.
No, the reason I bring it up is only because in the research I did back a long time ago, there seemed to be something that the sign that is the one that initiates the like actual we are in it now,
Yeah,
the ruler of that sign dictates the flavor of that whole period. Do I mean more so? And Saturn in particular, in the triplicity of air, was
yeah.
meant to be, and that's why another people use that to be like, oh gosh, it's going to be extra dire and horrible.
Yes,
Um,
yes, because Saturn is also the triplicity ruler of the
yeah,
air, triplicity by day and Mercury by
yes,
night. But I
yeah.
mean, I personally really like Saturn. I think
Well, you're
Saturn is it.
weird. It's okay.
No,
It's
but
all right. No,
that's
I'm
what
just
I was
joking.
saying. I think decay is important in like, this whole process. It's like what we're witnessing now, like we're seeing a lot of like shape go, and it's not necessarily easy, it's unstable, but I think it's important too, just for things to be stirred up. And Saturn shows us what's unsustainable. I think it's,
Yeah,
it offers the bones, it's like the backbone.
yeah, yes. What was your favorite part of doing this research,
Oh my God.
or a favorite part?
I like if I didn't have if I didn't have to do anything else, I would do all the periods. And also I would have looked way more into Asia and stuff to have a better wholesome idea. Um, I just got into every single book, like really fascinating to see just like how eternal the human, like fundamentally humanity is just always the same thing. There's all this dogma and crystallization around beliefs, but fundamentally, like, we're always getting to the same answer, even like, hundreds of years ago. It's just the same. The human heart, um, this kind of desire for like redemption and also like escape from Saturn. Just like this desire to like transcend and I don't know.
Well, I think a bunch of us are going to read The Literary Mind and The Carving of Dragons because that one blew my mind. What?
Yeah. So what I read in the critics is that it's pretty dense for somebody who does not have a
Great.
notion of the Chinese literature, because he goes
Makes
back.
sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Well, thank you so much
Thank you.
for your
Well, thank
approach around it. What do you think we should do, Elodie?
What do I think? I
Yeah,
don't do
come
whatever
on, you
you
got to
want.
tell us. What should we do, Elodie?
You should come to the riverboat.
Yes, exactly. Go have a coherent conversation at the riverboat about it. I think that's a great idea. All right. Well, with that, what I'll do is I'll stop the recording. Thank you again, Elodie.
Thank you.